Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to guide you through the fascinating mechanics of English grammar today. Have you ever actually stopped to think about the hidden physics of the words we use every single day? Well, today we're exploring a quirk of the English language that most native speakers obey flawlessly, yet completely unconsciously. So let's dive right into this by looking at a sentence that instantly feels wrong to any English speaker, even if, they can't explain exactly why. Listen to this. I am knowing the answer. It totally grates on the ear, doesn't it? It just feels broken. But think about it. If you can say, I am learning the answer, or I am writing the answer, why does the verb know suddenly break the entire machinery of the continuous tense? We're going to peel this onion layer by layer. We'll be hitting the rule of states, the categories of stative verbs, those tricky double agent verbs, exactly why the continuous tense fails, and finally, states in the past. Let's get to it. Part 1. The rule of states. This is all about describing existence, not action. We first need to establish the absolute golden rule of English verbs. They are fundamentally split into those that describe dynamic actions, the doers, and those that describe unmoving states, the simply beers. Dynamic verbs are your runners, jumpers, and builders. Stative verbs, on the other hand, describe conditions, existence, and relationships. And the cardinal rule here? Stative verbs basically always reject continuous ing tenses. So, how do we spot these in the wild? Well, you can group them into logical buckets like emotions, senses, mental states, and possession. These are verbs that describe how things are, not what things do. For instance, you don't actively do a preference, right? You just prefer. You don't perform the action of a soup costing $5, it literally just costs $5. These verbs describe a reality that simply exists. Moving to part 2, the double agent verbs. These are words living two lives. Now, what's really interesting here is that some verbs are total tricksters. They act as both stative and dynamic, entirely depending on the context. They're basically semantic double agents. Depending on the meaning they carry in a specific sentence, they can flip from a permanent, unmoving state straight into an active, temporary process. Take the most foundational verb of all, be. Normally, the verb be describes a permanent state, like John's usual baseline behavior. John is very honest. But it can suddenly take a continuous ing form to describe a temporary action, like Ken acting completely out of line at this exact moment. Ken is being very rude. Ken isn't inherently a rude person. He's just actively performing the action of rudeness right now. And this perfectly illustrates the divide with the verb have. You cannot be in the physical process of having ownership of a house. Ownership is a stative reality. You either own it or you don't. There's no halfway. But you absolutely can be in the active, dynamic process of eating a meal. So Lucy has a lovely house is completely static, while Gertie's having lunch is an action unfolding in real time. And hey, our senses do this too. A soup simply possesses the state of tasting bad. The soup isn't doing anything. It just passively holds that flavor. But a chef actively performs the dynamic action of testing a sauce. The chef is physically bringing a spoon to their mouth and analyzing the flavor. One is just a state of being, while the other is an active investigation. Okay, section 3, why continuous fails. Let's look at the deep syntax of time. The absolutely crucial point here is understanding exactly why stative verbs reject that continuous ing form. And for that, we've got to look at the heavy linguistics of how we actually experience time. Why does the grammar physically break down when we try to force a state into a continuous process? Well, linguists study these things called aspectualizer verbs to map out the exact temporal boundaries of an event. These are verbs like begin, start, continue, and stop. They don't actually describe the action itself, they describe the timeline of the action. They essentially lock on to specific segments of an event's internal clock. According to linguistic research, every dynamic action basically has its own internal anatomy. It has an onset, where it begins, a nucleus, where the main activity is in progress, and an end, where it finishes. Think about a sneeze, for example. You've got that sharp intake of breath. That's your onset. The sneeze itself, that's the nucleus. And the recovery is the end. The continuous ing form, the progressive aspect, is specifically designed to zoom right in on that middle part, the nucleus of activity. But here is the absolute kicker. Because states merely exist without a beginning, middle, or end process, they physically cannot fit into that progressive ing box, which entirely relies on a nucleus of activity. A state doesn't have an internal timeline that you can just slice up. You literally can't be halfway through the internal nucleus of owning a car or knowing a fact. You just do or you don't. This is exactly why a sentence like, Pat started owning a car at 4 feels totally broken to us. You cannot embed a state into a progressive aspectualizer because there's zero action nucleus to measure. Ownership doesn't have an onset in a nucleus. But on the flip side, Ivan stopped blushing works flawlessly. Blushing is a physical, dynamic event with a clear beginning, a middle nucleus, and an end. Finally, Section 4, States in the Past. Let's see how this hidden physics of time strictly governs how we're allowed to talk about history. It doesn't just affect what we're doing right now, it completely dictates how we describe the past. When we talk about the past, we usually grab one of two tools, used to or would. We use would for repeated dynamic actions, like the ancient Greeks would rely on the power of slaves. But we absolutely must use used to for states. You can say it used to seem strange, but you cannot say it would seem strange to describe a past state. Why? Because once again, states don't have that active repetition that the word would requires. Would demands a dynamic action to repeat over and over again. As Peter McAfee, a grammar expert, perfectly summarizes in a discussion about past habits, verbs like know are locked into their state of identity, completely restricting the tenses and modifiers they can play with. You can't say, I would know him, to mean you used to know him. You have to say, I used to know him. The very nature of the verb dictates the entire architecture of the sentence around it. It's fascinating! So, armed with this linguistic cheat code, pay attention to your own conversations today. See if you can spot the hidden laws of time governing your words. Notice when you seamlessly switch have from a state of possession right into an action of experiencing. Ask yourself, is what I'm describing an action with a nucleus or just a state of existence? I promise it completely changes the way you look at language. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the words you speak.